Hello and welcome everyone to the Boardroom Dynamics learning session. In our today's lesson, we'll continue with the chapter Governance Structures. Today we will study board size. And therefore, candidates, by the end of our today's lesson, you should be able to explain the factors that determine board size. That is the lesson objective. But let us first of all define board size. What's the meaning of board size? Now, board size is simply the total number of directors on a board. Board size is the total number of directors who sit on a board. And the optimal size should include both the executive and non-executive directors. The optimal size should include both the executive and the non-executive directors. The optimal size. The optimal size is the size that enables the board to meet its objectives. All right? The effectiveness. The optimality is reached when the board members include both executive and non-executive directors. The effectiveness in structuring the board candidates is very important for governing the company. And the board size has been found to be very important in the process of managing any successful organization. And this size varies between a country and another because different countries have different cultures. And that means that there is no optimal or standard board size among the companies in the world. And an organization's constitution generally prescribes the minimum and the maximum number of directors that may be appointed to the organization's board. So there is no generally accepted number of directors who should sit on a board. Company constitutions will at least provide a minimum number and a maximum number of directors who should sit on a board. The constitution can also give the minimum number of directors to constitute a quorum at board meetings. So the maximum and the minimum number of board members for statutory authorities and other public sector organizations are usually prescribed in legislation by which the authority or the organization is constituted. So if it is a public entity, then the Enabling Act of Parliament will specify the number of directors who should sit on the board of such a company. If it is a private company, then the company's constitution will specify the minimum or the number or maximum number of directors who should sit on a board. So, in other words, candidates, there is no perfect size for any board. There is no perfect size for any board. There is no perfect size for any board, and the optimal size of a board is influenced by several factors. The optimal size of the board size of a company may be influenced by several factors. The optimal size may be influenced by the following factors. There is no perfect size. However, if you have to have an optimal size, then the following factors will influence that optimal size. The first obvious factor is the size of an organization. Size and complexity. The size and complexity of the organization and its business. That is a factor that will determine the optimal size of an organization, optimal size of a board of an organization. All right? The size of that organization and the complexity of the business that the company engages in will determine the optimal size of an organization. Diversity. Diversity of the business lines. Diversity of the business lines of the organization. And the diversity can be in form of geographical diversity. It could also be functions. If a company is, say, a let me say it operates in different countries, that's what we are referring to as geographical diversity. So geographical diversity will determine the optimal size of the board. The diversity of the business, and that could either be geographical diversity or functional diversity. Here I mentioned the size and complexity of the business. If a business is a small one, if it's a small business in terms of the turnover and operations, then the board size will be small. But if it is a large business that has high turnovers and sells its products to a wide range of people, and it has maybe many managers and many functions and many employees, and the business is complex, it's not easy to determine several procedures and processes to run the business, then the number of directors who will sit on that board cannot be compared to those of a small organization. Another factor is cultural norms. Cultural norms. The cultural norms within the industry in which the organization operates. For example, university boards tend to be large. culturally, university boards are large. So these are just three factors that should be considered, or factors that will determine board size. The size and complexity of the business, the diversity of the business, the cultural norms of the industry in which the business does what? Operates. And candidates, more generally, an organization's board should be of a sufficient size so that there are sufficient board members to discharge the board's workload, and also to do what? To ensure an overall adequacy of skills and competencies. That's an important point that we need to note down. I've said that generally an organization's board should be of a sufficient size. I've said that generally an organization's board size should be of a sufficient size, so that one, there are sufficient board members. All right? Let me have it down. So that there are sufficient members to discharge the board's workload, There should be sufficient number of members who should do what? Discharge the board's workload, right? Then number two, ensure adequacy of the relevant skills and competencies. To ensure an overall adequacy of skills and competencies. In a subsequent chapter, we'll be studying director skills and competencies. For that are required on a board. We shall learn later on that for a board to effectively carry out its mandate or functions, a board should comprise members who possess certain competencies and skills, which include knowledge, mindset, and competencies. That we'll study in a chapter that we'll cover. That is chapter number, this is chapter number 4. All right? That is the next chapter. We'll be studying director competencies and skills. So there should be sufficient number of members to ensure an overall adequacy of skills and competencies. There should also be sufficient number of members who will populate the board committees, all right? Who will populate the board committees. For example, if a board has, say, 4 committees, a risk management committee, audit committee, nomination committee, and so on, and each committee is required to have, say, 7 members, each committee should constitute 7 members, that will mean there should be a sufficient number of members to populate the board committee, so that you don't have one director sitting on all committees. Because if the number is not sufficient, then you may find a situation where the members who sit on risk management committee are the same members who sit on the audit committee. And that is not good for board committees. So there ought to be sufficient number of members on the board who will populate board committees. Then there should be sufficient number on the board who will give diversity perspective, who will give a diversity of perspectives, who will give diversity of perspectives when it comes to the board deliberations. So if you have enough number of, a sufficient number of board members, several board members, then you may have a diversity of perspectives. But if you have a board that only has 2 members, then the diversity of perspectives is also limited. So there ought to be sufficient number of members to give a diversity of perspectives to the board's deliberations. Then another reason of having a sufficient number of members is so that there is engaged deliberations who can give what we call engaged members, who will encourage engaged deliberations. Engaged deliberations. So these are some of the reasons why it's important to have sufficient number of board members. Board size, which you have said is just the total number of directors on a board. A total number of directors on a board should be sufficient enough to 1, discharge the board's workload, 2, ensure an overall adequacy of skills and competencies, 3, populate the board committees, 4, give a diversity of perspectives, then lastly, encourage engaged deliberations. Are you following the discussions, candidate? I've explained that generally an organization's board size should be of sufficient size so as to have sufficient number of members who will make sure all that is done. Then 2, there should also not be too many board members. There are not too many members. There should also be not too many members. Why? And why, candidates, should there be not too many members? There should not be too many members such that there should not be too many members such that let me use dash, such that dash discussion is constrained. If you have too many members, then discussions can be what? Can be constrained. Too many members can cause discussions at the board to be constrained. So there should not be too many members such that discussions are constrained, and it is difficult for all board members to meaningfully engage in discussions and contribute to deliberations. All right? It's like having a parliament of more than 400 members. Can you imagine having a parliament of more than 400 members? That parliament, we can say, has too many members. And what will happen if you have such a large number? Discussions can be constrained, and it will be difficult for all the members to meaningfully engage in any deliberations. The second reason why it's not advisable to have too many members on the board is so as to have ease of interpersonal relationships. Ease of interpersonal relationships. It's very important, candidates, for directors to have what we call interpersonal relationships. Is very critical, what we call boardroom dynamics. The interactions between the members is very critical. But if you have too many members who sit on a board, then there will be no ease of interpersonal relationships on that board. So interpersonal relationships will be inhibited. Another reason is that members may not be able to know each other. Board members struggle. Board members struggle to know each other. Some of you attended maybe school, national school of, say, at 1,000 students. If you are part of the 1,000 students, you will remember, candidates, it was not easy to know that 1,000 students. If you went to a school and you are 1,000 of you in that school, knowing each other, it's not easy. It's not easy to know each other. You have to struggle to know each other. You struggle to know each other sufficiently. Because for board members, knowing each other is important so as to gain what we call trust and confidence. You can only gain trust and confidence in a person if you know that person. And you can only know that person if you have relations with such a person. But if there are many board members, knowing each other may not be easy. So it's important that there are not too many members who sit on a board. Do you understand? Yes, you do. I'm trying to explain why it's important to have a sufficient size, board size, a sufficient board size. And don't forget, we are studying board size, which is the total number of directors who sit on a board. We've explained here that the optimal size should include both executive and non-executive directors. So candidates, a board should be structured desirably so that there is an appropriate balance between executives and non-executives also. A board should be structured in such a way that the number of the non-executive directors are the majority. There should be a majority of non-executive directors. Another point is that, candidates, a board should be structured desirably so that there is at least a critical mass of, say, at least two for a small board, and that board should be board of independent directors, at least two. If it is a small board, then that board should have at least two independent directors. And independent candidates refers to directors who have true independence. This is independence of mind. Independence of mind in their deliberations as directors. When that happens, then we can say that such a board is structured desirably. A board that is structured desirably can also be described as an optimal size. An optimal size, we've said, should include both the executive and the non-executive directors. So candidates, that will mark the end of this lesson. Remember, I began and started by setting the lesson objective. I say that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain factors that determine an optimal size of a board. I've gone further to explain why a board should have sufficient members and why a board should not have too many members. We started by stating that a board size is the total number of directors who sit on a board. I've stated that an optimal size should include both executive and non-executive directors. I also said that there is no perfect size. There is no perfect board size for any board. There is no perfect size for any board. But there ought to be an optimal size. An optimal size is a size of a board that enables the board to function effectively. And the optimal size may be influenced by several factors, which include, but not limited to these three. One is the size and complexity of the business in which the company operates. Number two is the diversity of the business operations, and it could be geographical diversity or functional diversity. I also stated that cultural norms can also dictate the size of a board, can influence the size of a board, and we saw that generally, for example, university boards are generally large. That is an example, culturally. Then in our today's lesson, candidates, I've said that generally an organization's board size should be of sufficient size so that there are sufficient board members, one, and so that there are not too many members that sit on a board. I've explained reasons why there ought to be sufficient members. The first reason is that if you have sufficient members, then such members can discharge the board's workload. Number two, a sufficient size will ensure that there is overall adequacy of skills and competencies on the board. Three, there ought to be sufficient size so that the members can populate the board committees. Three, a sufficient board size gives a diversity of perspectives. Then lastly, a sufficient board size encourages engaged deliberations. I went further in this lesson to explain why there should not be too many members on a board. There ought to be not too many members on a board such that, one, discussions is constrained. If you have too many members who sit on a board, then such a size can constrain discussions. It becomes difficult for all board members to meaningfully engage and contribute in deliberations. If there are too many members, number 2, then there is no ease of interpersonal relations. It's not easy for members to relate. Ease of interpersonal relations at the board table is inhibited where there are too many members who sit on a board. Lastly, when you have too many members, the members struggle to know each other. The members struggle to know each other. And when members struggle to know each other, then it becomes impossible for the members to develop or to gain trust and confidence, which is very important insofar as board matters are concerned. So do you have any question? If you have it, send it. We will answer it. For now, here is your assignment. Assignment number 1, explain the factors that influence board size. 2, highlight reasons why A, there should be sufficient board members. B, highlight reasons why a board should not constitute too many members. That's your today's assignment. Thank you for your time. God bless you. See you in our next session as we continue learning, as we continue sharing knowledge in boardroom dynamics. Bye-bye.